what's going on, everybody? I'm Vinny Costa, editor of Street Muscle Magazine, and your host of the RodCAST, the all-encompassing car show where we talk about all things automotive. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Greg Acosta, editor of Engine Labs and all-around tech guru. What's up, Greg?
Hey, Vinny. What's happening? I did it. I had to give in.
Yeah, you got to get your coffee mug next time, dude.
Hey, Vinny. What's happening?
That Bill Lumberg.
Yeah.
I'm glad we don't have those, dude. Working in the office is not exactly like that.
Yeah.
But
office space. If life was like Office Space, I don't know if I ever could have lived. Like, I understand why he was so happy, just cleaning up the fire in construction.
Yeah, exactly. Working construction. I love working outdoors, dude. My dad owns a construction company, and I worked for him, when I was like in junior high and high school, and it was cool. I don't know if I'd want to do it for 30, 40 years, but it was fun.
All I know is after drywalling, man, drywallers, they have my everlasting respect. They make that look so easy. They do it.
Dude,
they do such a good job. Like, no, I mean, I'm pretty embarrassed by the drywall job I've done. Like,
I liked roofing. Roofing was cool. I guess that's why I like rock climbing and stuff. I'm not really afraid of heights.
That's another thing I suck at. I tried to repair our roof, and I think I ended up ripping off more shingles than I got nailed down. And in my defense, it was a repair. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, so I was trying to get under things, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, yeah. But yeah, those roofers, they made that. I mean, they had our whole roof off and back up in like 4 hours. It was nuts.
Well, it also has to do with like the technology and the design of like modern modern shingles and stuff. Anyways, speaking of design, we have a very special guest today. Really cool for our audience. Our audience, they'll probably know him from an article we ran on Street Muscle Magazine back in March. It was actually written by our own Rob Finkelman, who you'll remember from our episode last week, and some of his wildly popular columns on Street Muscle Magazine, including Rare Rides. Anyways, the article was an exploration of the man's work we're about to have on our show. And man, what a wide array of cars he's had his hands on. Of course, I'm talking about Sean Smith of Sean Smith Designs. Hey, what's going on, Sean? How are you, man?
Pretty good. How are you guys doing?
Doing well, man. Thank you so much for making some time to come on the show today. I know you're busy. You're in the middle of a move.
Yeah, I'm just moving my studio and my residence this week. I'm moving from the Inland Empire to San Diego. So.
Oh, cool. You're born and raised in Inland Empire, right? San Bernardino?
Yeah. Born and raised in San Bernardino. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's kind of where you got your start in this whole automotive thing, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was your father or your grandfather that owned a hot rod shop or something like that, right?
Well, not a hot rod shop. My grandfather on my mother's side owned. He started a shop in 1948 called A&B Automotive, and he was always into custom cars and stuff on his own hobbies. But then my father, of course, became a mechanic, and he worked for various shops and building transmissions and engines. And he bought the shop from my grandfather in 1978.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And so they just they specialize in repair work and the usual like lube jobs and things like that.
No, engine rebuilding, heavy repair, differential, rear end, transmission. It for years it mainly specialized in European transmission, to be honest with you.
Wow.
My dad had a pretty extensive background in European cars and being a Volvo technician, which is kind of odd, but he capitalized on that when he went on his own and did really good in the 80s era of that kind of weird Saab, Volvo, Volkswagen, Mercedes.
Yeah, there was like a little bit of a craze back then.
Kind of, yeah. Everybody had to have the European car, so I guess they still do in some respects.
So I'm interested, someone like yourself who's obviously, like a prolific designer. Have you ever drawn inspiration from that era or just that time in your life?
What era? When I was younger, or from my dad's era? Or
Yeah, like like those 80s kind of European cars. I know that early on you worked with like Volkswagen and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, that's what I like now is more the 80s, 90s cars. I'm actually, Sean Davis from Autotopia, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to talk him into doing an IROC project, but he's
Oh,
on
cool.
with it. Yeah, I think 80s and 90s cars are kind of where it's at right now. I think it has been that way for a while. I think it started with the Porsche craze, the early Porsche stuff, and then it kind of moved later and later because those got economical. But I love all that stuff right now. So
Definitely, man. Well, so you grew up in a kind of like a hotbed for hot rods and just like cool cars in general. I mean, you're somewhat near the coast. You're down here in Southern California. Is it safe to say that you spent a lot of time in that shop when you were growing up?
yeah, when I probably around the age of 12, 13, my dad every summer would wake me up. Like all the other kids were riding bikes and going to the beach and going to Disneyland and doing all this. And my dad is like, no, you're going to work. And it was like my dad I had to go to the shop today with my dad. Actually, the funny thing, I had to pick something up, so I had to ride down with him. But he gets there at like 5 a.m, and he works till 5:30, and he gets home at 6:30, and he's 72 years old right now. So, but yeah, when I was younger, it was you're going to work with me, and he's kind of learning the business. Everything from mopping floors to trash cans to helping him rebuild stuff to getting parts, everything.
So did you get some hands-on time, like working on the cars, or was it mainly like gopher stuff?
Oh, it was mainly gopher stuff. He threw like the roughest jobs at me, and he was mainly trying to tell me that you can do something with cars, but don't work on cars. Like you don't want this industry, But yeah, I mean, I worked my ass off, and every summer I made pretty good money, and I'd come back with good school clothes, and I'd save up money for wheels for my car or whatever. I mean, like I didn't have a summer, but come September, everybody was like, "How did you get that?" I'm like, I don't know, I worked for it, So
What kind of car were you pushing back then?
my first car was a '86 El Camino.
Nice, very
Yeah,
cool.
my dad's accountant actually had it, and he got in an accident with it, and so he had it custom painted all black. Everything was like all custom black, and the guy that painted it was actually he owned a specialty shop doing Porsche stuff, so it was really beautiful black paint job. So I saved up for that, and that was my first car. And then it took me a couple summers, but I saved up for like a set of billet wheels and lowered
Nice.
it. That was my first project.
That's cool, man. I love those G-body El Caminos. So tell
Yeah.
me, I know that there's an interesting story as to how you kind of got into the whole design thing. I believe when you were in school, and Rob touched on this on the article, something about Phil Knight. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. So I hated high school, traditional high school, and
Yeah.
so I really only wanted to just get out in the real world and work. It's kind of used to the work ethic, I guess, I got from my old man. And I found out I was having a hard time in high school, just getting along with kids and both just getting the homework and just having a hard time grasping things. So I went to continuation school. And continuation school allowed me to have Fridays off, which I could work more, and I'll get to that in a minute. But they did have an art program in there, and the art program had a teacher in there, Mr. Peterson, actually. And I was drawing shoes at the time because I liked shoes too. I was always kind of a sneakerhead. And he was like, "Oh, these are great. You should do industrial design." And I'm like, "What's industrial design?" And he goes, "Well, there's like one of the best industrial design schools down in Pasadena. I'll take you there. We'll do a field trip with a couple other kids." And I was like sophomore year, so I'm like, "All right." So I went and did that, and it was Art Center, and I went back and I drew more shoes. I loved Art Center. Fell in love with it. Fell in love with more of the automotive program instead of the industrial design program. And well, cars are part of industrial design, but then I started drawing stuff, and he took all my stuff and sent my artwork up to Nike, and I didn't know about it. And he sent all my homework in to Nike, and I got a handwritten note back from Phil Knight saying, this is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. This is the path you need to be on. By the time he wrote me back, I was 15. And I was already kind of more into car design, actually. So, but yeah, it was actually Phil Knight where I was like, "Oh man, I might be able to do this professionally,"
Yeah, that's pretty epic, dude. Like the head of Nike, known for coming out with some prolific shoes. Him and Tinker Hatfield are like, it's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, we got to work with Tinker Hatfield years later when I worked at Ring Brothers. It's kind of weird.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah. So we're jumping ahead a little bit. I do want to get into that, but
Yeah.
so you're more into cars. So how did you learn the craft of coming up with renderings and just the design process? How did you learn that?
I've always been drawing since I think my mom started seeing me draw like 3 or 4. I started doing things that made sense. Definitely by 4, I was doing cars that made. I mean, they weren't the best drawings, though, obviously, but she was like, "Wow, that's a car. That's going up on the refrigerator." So I always paid attention in art in school, and I always, was looking at art books and drawing books. And around that time of like 12, 13, 14, when I met that teacher and he taught me about industrial design, I would ride my bike to the library and I looked up industrial design. And there was all these old books from the 70s that taught you marker rendering, industrial design sketching, the craft of just doing professional style industrial design work. So I checked them out and I tried to do all that on my own, recreate all the demos. So it was really all from the library. There was no internet back then. This was like 1994, 95 maybe. And the internet was just, it definitely wasn't what it was now.
Right.
So I was teaching myself, and then I was going to continuation school, and I was getting pretty good. And when my teacher brought me down for a second time to meet with the counselor about what to do after I get out of high school, they were like, "Well, why don't you, in my junior year, we have a Saturday High program, which is a high school program on the weekends, and you can learn car design." They had car design classes that were taught by one instructor was from Porsche, the other one was from Kia,
Wow.
like real people. So my parents started driving me down there until I got my license to take lessons on the weekends. So now I'm like 16, 15, learning from professional people. It's crazy.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And
So
that's
did you
kind
go
of
down
where
to
the-
their facility or something, or?
Yeah, I went down to Art Center every Saturday, Friday,
Very cool.
Saturday, and then that on Sunday. But so I was going to actually like 2 schools, and some of the stuff was transferable. I was taking from when I got into Art Center.
That's cool. So did they have like a big drafting table where they were actually showing you like, okay, so this is the design process? Was it that in depth, or how did it work?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Art Center is known for is they're known for their demos. It's doing rendering demos. So what they'll do is they'll do like a 2-hour or 3-hour demo of a sketch, and then we'll color copy it, and then everybody will try to recreate that. But the homework is pretty rigorous too. We'll get, the teacher will be like, next week's 30 or 40 full color renderings are due by next Monday. So
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That's so cool, man. So then how did you kind of segue that into, your freelance work, actually getting paid for what you were doing?
Yeah, so I was going to Art Center, and then I was like, wow, I'm getting pretty good at this. And I was still into the custom car scene, and my parents were into hot rods, and then my sister was in a car club, and I had my El Camino, and so we're just going to shows, and so people started knowing that I was doing renderings. So I started doing project vehicle renderings for projects for hot rods, and I was charging 40, 50 bucks here, 40, 50 bucks there. But for somebody in high school, 40, 50 bucks plus, I was working for I was working as a janitor for my high school, and I was working for my dad. So I had 3 jobs. So I was making pretty good money for a kid in high school, So,
Yeah, and you were effectively being paid to build your portfolio.
right, correct. Yeah.
That's cool, man. So how did you make the leap from amateur to professional?
Art Center was the transition phase for that. Yeah. So when I got out of high school, I graduated a year early, and I was like, okay, I'm going to Art Center. And they were like, hold up, you're too young. The average age at Art Center at the time was like 32 years old. So
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, most of the people had already had another career. So they were like, you need to go to another college first and then come back and see us. And I'm like, oh man, this sucks. What am I going to do? Went to JC for a year, and I got my electives out of the way, put my portfolio together, and I reapplied, and they let me in. So I got in when I was 20. Yeah, I don't know. So
Very cool. So what was the first big gig that you had out of the art center? I know a minute ago you mentioned working with the Ring Brothers and stuff. Was that the first big step into your career now, or?
Actually, the first big gig I had was at Art Center. When you're at Art Center, you're almost required to do professional internships.
Oh, okay.
They require you to do at least 2 or 3 professional internships. So my first internship was at Mazda in North America, and
Mm.
when you do an internship through Art Center, it's not like you're go get coffee, go get this, go get this. They actually like, all right, we're putting on a concept car, or we're putting on your production car. You're sketching on this program. So I got put on Miata.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I got put on Miata. I got put on a concept car, and so for the first time, I was like real world experience. So that was probably 2002. And I did 2 internships at Mazda, and then I did another internship at Hyundai where I got put on a concept car for the Detroit Auto Show.
Oh,
And
cool.
so that was pretty world experience, like threw me in the deep end, like let's just see if you can swim type of stuff. I graduated. My first job was with Honda R&D, and I worked in the motorcycle division.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
Had you,
a week after graduating, I was literally just went to Honda. Yeah.
dude, that's awesome. Did you have a background in motorcycles? Did you know how to ride, or
No,
any interest really?
no interest. I like motorcycles. I think they're cool, but they're I don't know. If you don't like bikes 100%, I don't think you should be on a bike. And that was actually a problem because they were like, "Well, you don't know how to ride bikes," and I'm like, "Yeah, well, I don't need to. I was getting stuff picked, and that
Yeah.
was actually one of the dividing points where I was like, all right, you guys want a motorcycle rider or do you want a designer? I know you want both, and you can have both, but I'm out of here."
Yeah.
For like a couple of years, I quit.
So what was the move after that?
Freelance for a little bit. Was pretty busy. That was right around the time of like 2006. I was walking out of the SEMA show in between SEMA Convention Center and the Hilton. At the time, it was the Hilton, and I bumped into a guy that had a '66 Mustang. 2 guys, and I was like, "Oh, this is a really nice Mustang," and they were it was Mike and Jim Ring, and we started talking, and so I worked for them for a little bit. And then after that, I had a job at Rockstar Video Games designing cars for video games.
So tell me a little bit about your time with the Ring Brothers. I know you mentioned working with Tinker Hatfield. What was that all about?
So I worked for the Ring Brothers, and then 1 year at SEMA. This is like 4 years later. We had done a Mustang called, it was a wide body Mustang called the Producer. It's bright orange
Oh, okay.
for a gentleman named Gary Bowers. And it was a pretty progressive, crazy car. And all these guys came up to it and were looking at it. And I recognized a few of them because a lot of my friends worked at Nike, and I knew a couple of these individuals. And the guy that was like the main guy was looking at the car was Tinker. And Mike's like, "Look at, who's this guy?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's, you know who that is? That's Tinker Hatfield." He's like, "Tinker what?" And I'm like, "Tinker Hatfield, like he's done every Air Jordan and started the Jordan brand with Michael, and just like he's the guy for Nike, right?" And he's like, "Oh, really?"
Yeah.
So we were talking, and I explained to him that I knew a lot of the people that worked under Tinker, and we just got a really comfortable circle going. And he says, "Yeah, we should do something." And Mike and Jim were like, "Yeah, we should totally do something." So the next project we decided to work on was the 71 Pantera. It was yellow.
Ah,
So they collaborated with Nike on the interior and a lot of the process on that. Unfortunately, I didn't see that project through because I went to go work for Saleen Automotive. But
yeah.
yeah, Nike did finish the car off with Mike and Jim, and it was a huge success. It's a really cool car. So
That's awesome, man. So I know you mentioned just a moment ago that you started designing some cars for video games, Rockstar specifically. I know Grand Theft Auto, and what were some of the other projects that you worked on?
the main video game I worked on at the time was Midnight Club LA.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love that game.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun game. So they didn't have any really art direction for the first games before I came on board. They just went to SEMA, took pictures, put them in the game, worked with the companies that made those parts, and they really wanted an aftermarket designer to design the body kits and the graphics and the vinyls and the interiors and the paint schemes. And so they hired me to do all that, and that was a really fun project. was I would think that was there for just under 4 years or 3 years.
That's awesome.
But yeah, super fun. Yeah, it's really fun working in the video game industry. Yeah.
What kind of freedom does that afford you working in the video game realm as opposed to working with real cars that are going to be built? I mean, can you get a little bit more crazy? How does that work?
Yeah, you get a lot crazier, push the proportions a lot. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself like kind of drawing from that pool of inspiration that you once designed for video game cars, but for real cars?
Not entirely. I try to. I mean, whenever I start doing a car, I try to be as wild as possible in the beginning, but eventually you got to pull some restraint in because that's the actual part of design. You just can't do stuff that doesn't get made. If somebody has to make it. But it's nice to work in the video game industry and be able to not worry about that for a while, you know?
Yeah.
We were doing some really crazy wide bodies at the time where you could have a Corvette and then you could buy a wide body and then you turn it on in the video game and it looked nothing like a Corvette, you know? And the really cool thing about that is they didn't have to pay a licensing fee to a company that made it. So that's kind of the benefit of that.
Yeah, that was a really cool game. That whole era of like racing games was a lot of fun. Need for Speed, like Underground, all those games are really cool. So then how did you move from that to working with Saleen? I have a particular car that I want to ask you about when you were over there, but I'm curious about the origin story.
I was working on Mike and Jim, and we were doing a project for Ford Motor Company, and it was a 2012 Mustang for SEMA. And I don't know how, but I was working in LA at the time in my office, and I get a call, and it was Steve Saleen. You know, it's weird. I still don't know how he got my number. And he was like, "This is Steve Saleen," and I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "I want you to come in and for an interview." And I was like, "Okay." So I came in and met with him, but things were going pretty good with the Ring Brothers, and I really was happy there. But Steve had a great facility and had some great projects on deck, but I felt obligated to Mike and Jim at the time, and I saw SEMA through, finished that last project with Mike and Jim, and we saw Steve. I saw Steve again, and Steve threw out another number, which was considerably a lot more money than the first time he offered me money. And I said, yeah, I didn't have to move to Wisconsin, which as much as I wanted to work with Mike and Jim, and I still have, regrets because those two of my best friends to this day. But at the time, Steve had some projects on deck that were really good for me, and I got good experience. Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
So yeah, it was basically after SEMA, like we kind of debuted that car, and I met Steve, and we agreed.
Okay, yeah, and then you got to stay over here in the Inland Empire. They're just right up the 215.
Yep.
So the car that I want to ask you about was another Mustang. It was that George Fulmer car that you guys did.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So you took inspiration from his original race car. Is that something that you find yourself doing in a lot of your designs, or where do you gather your inspiration from?
My inspiration comes from all over. It's really weird. I'll touch on that in a minute. But that particular project came down the pipe because Steve had done the Parnelli Jones cars.
Yeah.
Remember those? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a huge hit for Steve. And he loved that whole concept of doing a very retro themed, iconic race car driver car. And so he wanted to pick it up again with the George Fulmer livery and design and cues that George Fulmer had back in the 60s and the 70s. So
very cool.
The concept came from Steve, and he was really good friends with George. And we got the licensing agreement with George. Everything was in the clear. So basically, Steve just said, take that car and update it to today. Do whatever you want. So,
That's cool, man. When you're working with clients, obviously they're hiring you for a reason because they like your designs. So do you find that they give you a lot of freedom?
My clients or Steve? I'm sorry.
Your clients, just in general.
Yeah, some of them do. Some of them think they know everything, and they want to design the car. Or at least want me to draw the car the way they want it.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I get a lot of that. I think overall in the industry, industry needs to trust the builders more. I think if you look at every heavy hitter car in the industry that has done really well, it's always had some type of big designer that's been actively more than half involved with the whole project the whole way through. Anytime you get somebody that's like, I have ideas and I just want to draw them out, that works too. But oftentimes it's not as good as if the designer followed his sketches to get built all the way through. So sometimes it's great and sometimes it's frustrating, but that's the way it is with everything, you know.
A moment ago, you said that you were going to touch on your a part of your design process, but I'm curious, from the ground up, you're looking at the blank page or your blank computer screen. Where do you start? And I know you say you draw inspiration from various places, but once you've got the idea in your head, what's the process look like?
Um, the idea in my head usually comes from information that I get from the client, and a lot of what dictates that is budget, what he wants to do with the car, or what the builder wants to do with the car. And what I mean by that is sometimes I get people that are just like, I want to build the baddest car at SEMA. I don't care if it really drives or whatever. I just want it to be this show-stopping thing. Perfect. Okay. We could do a lot of conceptual stuff, a lot of rapid prototyping, and a lot of billet parts, a very wild interior. And that allows me to set the bar of how wild I want to go with the inspiration. A lot of people will come to me and they're like, I just want a really clean car that's timeless. For 10 years from now, it's going to look good. So that kind of sets the stage of how wild I go. But generally speaking, there's a kind of a theme that I do like to stick to, which is keeping the overall proportion of the car the same. But I like to draw in on the details that get you there. I think working with the stance and the proportion of the car in terms of how the car sits on the wheels is probably one of the most important things, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I really like to get in on the stance, the wheel and tire fitment. I like a car that sits low, not too low, but that brings you in, and then just really nice subtle detailing keeps you there when you look at it. So that's kind of my ethos or kind of taste that I like to do.
Very cool. So once you start laying out your designs, do you start with like the whole car first, or do you start with like just a wheel? Like, okay, I like this wheel. What and now we're going to put it on this car. How does that work? I mean, how many drawings do you do for one rendering? How many sketches do you have to have? Interior, wheels, exterior, the whole deal.
It depends. It depends on the project. If it's an extensive project, I'll start up with just loose overall drawings of the car, just an overall gesture sketch, and then once we like that direction, we'll hone that in and detail it from there. Some guys will be like, I just want one view, one rendering with this wheel on it, with this paint scheme. What can you do? And I try to fit everything in under a budget and give them that under that budget. Other guys, some of the projects I work for, SpeedKore, they take 9 months to a year. I'm on it the whole entire year.
Wow.
And I just bill them hourly, monthly. And those are the cars that are the very extensive ones that you can see every little detail, every little thing is thought out,
Right. So are you designing, you mentioned like using billet parts and like just wild materials and designs a moment ago. Does that mean that you're like sketching like things as detailed as like, control arm and spindle design with the way that the suspension geometry is going to be configured? Or do you mainly just focus on the things that you can see on the exterior and interior of the car?
Mainly exterior and interior detailing. That stuff would be the items you're talking about would fall under engineering.
Gotcha.
So we usually have an engineer on staff. I have people that I work with that I could bring in, or we'll work with a vendor. So say we're trying to achieve a certain stance, and maybe we'll work with Roadster Shop to do a custom frame and make sure we can get that look. I don't do any of that part. Everything I do is aesthetic, but hopefully in some ways it's functionally aesthetically, pleasing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's in your opinion, what's the most extensive build that you've been involved with as part of the design?
Probably the Black Label, a couple different cars, but probably the Black Label Mustang for Saleen was definitely that's right. The current one that's out now. Everything was changed on that except for the doors. Everything.
Greg, can we pull that up real quick?
Yeah, we dropped the engine down lower to get a different hood height. we just did a lot of different engineering on that. The Saleen Tesla was very extensive too. We debuted that at Pebble Beach back in 2014. That was another car we fully modeled in Alias, which is a CAD design program. Did Class A surfacing on it. So those two projects are pretty in depth. And then on the more hot rod end of things, probably some of the stuff I'm working on with SpeedKore right now at the moment.
Definitely.
Yeah, like Evolution Charger was pretty crazy.
For sure.
I can't talk about it now, but there's some more projects we're working on that are pretty extensive. Yeah.
So tell me about SpeedKore. So you were involved from the very beginning. How did that whole play? How did that whole thing play out?
So I was working at Saleen, and we were actually working on a supercar project, and I was doing some work with a client that I was doing freelance work for, Dave Salvaggio. And David mentioned that he was trying to put me in touch with Mercury Racing to put this Mercury motor in this supercar project we were working on. So Dave came out with Eric Christensen from Mercury, and we had a meeting and met with Steve, and project didn't really come to fruition, but I always stayed in contact with Dave. And so Dave was like, yeah, I'm trying to put together a company or some sorts with a gentleman named Jim Kasmerick, who's a very industrious guy based out of Milwaukee, owns one of the largest sheet metal manufacturing companies in the United States, does a lot of military contracts, owns a minority stake in the Milwaukee Bucks, just a very, very all-around business-minded dude. Wanted to get involved with cars, and I was like, oh, okay, well, keep me in mind. And he's like, yeah, I will. So 4 months later, he calls me and hey, we'd really like to get this thing, going. You want to come out for an interview? And I'm like, well, I'm kind of happy at Saleen right now. Maybe not. Calls me 4 months after that, and he's like, all right, we got to get you on an airplane. I'm like, okay, let's just talk. We'll see. So we go on an airplane, and they entertained me, and at first we were talking about doing power sport things, just all kind of different stuff, not so much cars in the beginning. And I agreed to do something with them, and things at Saleen were getting a bit redundant at the time. I was ready for change on my end. Saleen's a great company. I just wanted something new. So I quit, joined SpeedKore. At the time, we didn't even have a name. I thought, okay, well, what if we take the concept of doing new cars and Mustangs, Camaros, Challengers, and also doing old cars, Mustangs, Camaros, Challengers, and we do them both as custom cars. We can offer a run of cars, and then we could also do a line of parts. So we like that as a business model, and we came up with the name SpeedKore, which is actually, the name SpeedKore is not out of hardcore. It's actually to do with a group of people, like a core or a union of people that are speed or automotive enthusiasts. So I came up with the name and worked on the logo. And the logo is actually, it's like a 3-prong logo, and the 3 prongs stand for design, manufacturing, and engineering, which was all of our backgrounds. I was design, Jim was from the production background, and Dave from the hot rod building and engineering background that he has. So
very cool.
But yeah, that's basically how we started it. And the first car that we started was the Tantrum Charger.
Yeah, man. SpeedKore, is really known in the industry now for building some wild, striking cars. Carbon kind of being the motif that everyone knows. And the first one was that Tantrum Charger. And then up until, or I think the last one that I saw in person was the Turbo Demon. And that thing was pretty nuts. So what's the deal with all the carbon? Was that by design? No pun intended.
So we agreed that we wanted to do something with the early model and the late model, and we needed to make parts, because you do make money in the builds, but you make more money in the parts. It's kind of the old business model that Boyd Coddington had, and I think that still works to a certain degree. But to get the parts out there, Ring Brothers are making billet, Roadster Shop's making frames, Detroit Speed Engineering is doing suspension. What are we going to do? We got to have that one thing. So actually, it was Dave Salvaggio who came up with the idea of working in carbon as the main medium for SpeedKore and making us different for everybody else in the industry. So he put together a skeleton crew of some really good carbon guys, and it just worked. At first, we were going to do carbon, hoods and fenders, and then all of a sudden we were like, well, why can't we just do the whole car carbon? You know, like if we're going to do this, we might as well do it, right? So then Dave started doing all the cars in carbon, which allowed us to do everything more in CAD, which allowed us to do wilder designs. So it just
Yeah.
worked out. Yeah.
How does that work? Since I would imagine you guys are making all these one-off panels. How did that affect you as the designer?
It was better actually because what we were doing was scanning the whole car and creating all these molds, and I could exercise my designs to get them implemented into the mold, build the part or the hood or the fender or the quarter panel in CAD, and we can mill that out one to one and then pull a carbon part off of it. So I was getting a lot more design feasibility and better translation from sketch to the final product. It was a lot better coming from a carbon fiber part and a carbon fiber car versus using sheet metal. I mean, there's some amazing sheet metal guys there. Bill Jacobs, one of them. But with doing a drawing and then putting it in alias and then milling it out, it's just so much faster.
Makes sense. So, but one of the design elements that have kind of set some of the builds that you've been involved with apart have been, different paint schemes and things like that. Did you feel limited when you guys started working with all this carbon? Like, okay, the carbon is going to be the scheme here, so we're not going to have paint, or at least not, like a colorful scheme or anything like that. Did that bother you?
No, because we actually tried to do different things with the carbon. So when we first started out, we were like, okay, a couple of the first versions have to be all carbon because people got to know if we paint them, nobody's going to know they're carbon. And so as a business model, we were really trying to sell ourselves as the carbon fiber guys. But we were trying to do things with the carbon that made it different. So like on the first full-bodied carbon car we did was 2017 Mustang for the SEMA show, and we did all the graphics in candy blue and we tinted the carbon in stripes. So that was a way of us doing graphics and paint and carbon and showing off a full carbon body car that was different. The next car we did was a Hellcat. We did half the car gloss carbon and then the other half
matte. Yeah,
exactly, matte and stripes. So that's actually one of the ways we do that. And then did you ever see the Dodge Demon we did that has the red that's tearing away? And
yeah, that was really cool.
yeah, so we're trying to do things where we're exercising good paint skills and good graphic skills and showing that the car's carbon as well. I'm kind of in the area now where I'd like to just go the route of Ferrari and just start painting the cars because I don't need, we all know that SpeedKore does carbon cars now. So
No, I think it's really cool, man, and they're so striking when you're walking the halls of SEMA. You're seeing a lot of crazy paint jobs and a lot of graphics and a lot of wraps, and then to see a car that's completely carbon and it's not a wrap, and then when you get up on it and you look at it closely and you can see like the weave is done so in a way that it carries from panel to panel. It's really impressive.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. There's been a lot of fights and there's been a lot of arguments with people that are like, oh, that's a wrap. And we're like, no, it's not a wrap. And they're like, yeah, no, it's a wrap because it's so perfect and the weave does line up. And they get super heated and they're like, that's a damn wrap, I'm telling you. And then we open up the door jams and it's all carbon. And they're like, well, that's a sticker too. And I'm like, okay. Like, I'm not even wasting my time on you anymore.
I'm curious, and this might not be in your area of the project, but what did you guys have to do? And obviously, you're lightening the car up quite a bit. Did you guys have to place weight in the chassis to get it to settle the way that it should, or did that not come into play?
So what we do is, and this is going to be changing in the future. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but what we do now, though, is we usually do a chassis, and we do keep some hard points. And what hard points are the points of the car that are structurally sound that we bond the carbon to. So we do keep a firewall, and we do keep the jams, and we do keep a little bit of the structure on the inside just to bond to. But in the future, I think we'd like to move into like a full monocoque style, like you'd see with a supercar. But right now, we bond everything to some of the hard points, the main structural points of the car. So there's some metal, but overall, I would say the majority of the cars, I mean, you got to believe me, it's carbon. You know, a lot of people
Oh, I
don't.
do. I've seen them up close.
And
Yeah.
I have my iPhone out and I'll show a picture of them like cutting the car, you know, the whole car off, and they're like, "Oh, okay, now they believe me." You know, so it's crazy. So
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen them in person. I've seen it open, with the doors open, the hood open. I mean, it's obvious that it's real.
yeah.
But anyways, so are you still partnering with SpeedKore? I know that you've since then struck out on your own again. But are you still like partnering with them on any projects?
Yeah, I actually just talked to him this morning. So I pretty much talk to Dave at least every other day, or Dave Salvaggio. Um, Working on a lot of projects right now. Things are kind of weird because the whole SEMA thing got canceled, so we don't know what's going on right now. Usually I'm
Yeah.
coming our projects and then helping all these builders with their marketing projects. That's not going on right now, but it's weird. Short answer, yes, I'm still working for SpeedKore, but a lot of people, SpeedKore included, you know, we have a lot of great cars now, a lot of great parts to debut, but no forum or setting to debut them at because there's no SEMA.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are just trying to find out what's going on with that. Yeah.
I hear you. Well, in the meantime, you have your hands full, not only with moving, but with Sean Smith Designs. Tell
Right.
us about striking out on your own, under your own banner. What's that been like, and what are you up to now?
So yeah, I work for myself now. I worked for SpeedKore, moved to Milwaukee. Had some family stuff I had to tend to, so I had to move back from back to California from Milwaukee, and it was just consuming my time. So we parted ways, but in a good way. They were my first client actually, so they've always been my main client. And even Saleen, I still work for Saleen. Still work for almost all my clients I've worked for, which is really fortunate. But it feels good because I get to pick and choose and have the freedom to do what I want. You know, I get to have the freedom to do what I want. I get to set my own hours. But you know, there's goods and bads to everything. You know, I mean, Saturday comes around and I'm working. Sunday comes around and I'm working, and you know, but then there might be a Friday might be able to take off and set my own schedule. So I like it. It's just the freedom of a business owner is really good, you know, and I can work on a lot of different projects. So that's the main thing with me is having a diverse client base.
That's awesome, man. Well, I mean, you wouldn't be in a position to have that kind of freedom if you hadn't cut your teeth on all these like really badass builds, and now people seek you out for exactly that. I'm curious, Sean. Before we kind of wrap up and let you go back to what you were doing, if you were to give advice to someone who was interested in doing the same thing as you, or following in those footsteps, I know a lot of school programs have been cut, or things like that, and so maybe the opportunities that you had aren't around anymore, or maybe they are, I don't know. But if you were to give a young person advice on how to get into this field, what would you tell them?
Draw, draw as much as you can. Draw as much as you can, but at the same time, let your mind be open to other things other than cars, because you're not always going to get a car job. You're definitely not going to always be able to draw hot rods because it's a very narrow niche industry. I think the only reason why I'm in it is because I was almost raised into it. And I was pretty fortunate to be in the California hotbed when this whole thing was popping up in the 80s and the 90s. But I think draw, be diverse, have an open mind, be willing to try new things, be willing to try new projects. I mean, just think if I would have been like, no, I'm not designing motorcycles, or no, I don't want to design video games, or, I've done everything from helmets to clothes to shoes. And there's times where, cars get old and doing something new is a good approach. So I just think having a good mindset and having an open mind is the most important thing. And then after that, I think you need to draw. And I stress the drawing because everybody's like, well, the computers do everything right now. No, not really. Because you still need to be able to take your idea and translate it on a piece of paper before you get it into the CAD program. Because you need to know what's going on to build that part. So it's not like you just hit the easy button and people are like, oh, it's simple, really. Here's my part and I'm a designer now. The sketches will translate and communicate your ideas to your clients, to you, and it's really, really what solves the problems, I think. With me, I always tell people, if the power goes out right now, I can take a Prismacolor pencil and still pay the bills.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
So,
that's true, man.
really. So I think drawing's the most important thing.
That's awesome, man. I know that a lot of our viewers and listeners are going to be appreciative of that advice. Before we let you go, where can people find out more about what you're currently working on? Where can people message you if they want to come to you with a project, etc.?
Probably the easiest way is my Instagram, Sean Smith Designs, and then my website, seansmithdesigns.studio. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. It's got all my contact information. You can see my projects and everything. It's hard, you know, because like I can't release anything what I work on. So for me to make new content, it rarely gets released. So I have to post older projects, but you know, that's where I try to update everything the most. You know.
Yeah, unfortunately, as you mentioned, SEMA has been canceled.
Yeah.
But do you have any idea where we might be able to see your next project that you've worked on?
It depends. There's a lot of different. We're in a weird industry state right now with SEMA being gone. There's a lot of different ideas of how these cars are going to get debuted. So I'm hoping, between now and February, digitally they'll be released. Maybe they'll do private releases. Maybe they'll do private parties. I don't know. There's a couple different ways of doing things. But one thing's for sure, everything's changing every day with what's going on. So
Definitely, man. Well, we are all adapting, as are you.
Yep.
Viewers, listeners, audience at home, check him out. Sean Smith Designs on Instagram and SeanSmithDesigns.com. I mean, the guy's built. He's been involved with some really badass cars. Check out his designs, and if you need some work done, hit him up. Sean, thank you so much for making some time to do this, brother.
Appreciate it. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
appreciate it, man.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So there you have it, Greg. Man, another fantastic podcast. What a great episode. And a fantastic follow-up to the article that we published back in March.
Yeah.
Sean's a super nice guy. I met him at the LA Roadster show at the same time that I met Sean Davis. So full circle here. And
so many Seans.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, no. So we were there, and he had a car there that they were showing, and I believe it was a SpeedKore car. Challenger maybe, and it was awesome. And ever since then, I wanted to have him on the show, and so we finally did. And I think we did a service to anybody who wants to get into that arena of design. He spoke to a wealth of knowledge and experience. And if I was a kid and I was watching this, I'd be stoked because there's programs out there that art school that he went to seemed really cool. It gave him a leg up in this industry, and so I'd be looking to do that if I wanted to get into design.
Yeah, and it sounds like he had a teacher that actually cared,
Definitely.
So that's a leg up.
Reminds me of when I was in high school, and we had a similar program like that for graphic design that I spoke to Ed Justice Jr. about the other day, and that's where I learned how to develop photos. Well, that is a dying art. It did teach me the principles of photography, which is now very valuable being the editor of Street Muscle.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I remember in high school we had photography.
Yeah.
Period. There was no graphic design. There was no.
No, yeah, we had to go to a separate program called a Regional Occupation Center, and they had a bunch of different programs from welding to banking to graphic design, like I took, and various other programs. But if you just took art, you couldn't learn any of that stuff. It was just like painting and things like that. And then if you wanted to do photography at high school, you had to work. You had to be on the newspaper, and that was it.
So. Yeah, I mean. I think today, I see some of these high school graduates and the classes they get as part of their regular curriculum is stuff that you had to go to like specialized schooling for, 15, 20 years ago. And that's cool. That's only going to expand the market,
It's definitely cool, but at what cost, I wonder, because now we don't have like shop class and we don't have, small engines. Like,
that needs to come back.
Some schools do. Yeah. Some schools do have shop and some of these really cool classes, but I know a lot of them, a lot in my hometown that don't have that stuff anymore, and that's a bummer.
Yeah, but then you got places like, the Hot Rodders of Tomorrow and stuff, and they're trying to pick it up, and that's an amazing program. I love watching that. It's cool to see all the schools get involved, and I wish there were more, West Coast teams, and because it still seems like that's kind of something that more Midwest, schools embrace, but because the coast, they're just too bougie to teach shop class, right?
Yeah. Well, or maybe they figure that the kids will learn it out on the street racing. But anyways, yeah, so I had a great time interviewing Sean. Sean, if you're still watching, thank you, man. I really appreciate your time. And definitely everybody go check out SeanSmithDesigns.com. Greg, before we wrap it up, what's going on Engine Labs this week?
Well, the big one is got to be the Illuminator. We talked about this a few weeks ago, I think, but it's finally live. Getting to dive into the Gen 3 Coyote Illuminator engine. Talk to Ford Performance. Sorry, that's a hard habit to break,
Yeah, I got you.
At least I'm not calling it Ford Motorsport, right?
Yeah.
But it's a real deep dive. We got to watch the photos that are in the article of it being assembled are Ivan's actual engine, which is serial number 0001.
I still can't get over that, dude. How that happened, I don't know, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's going in just a rad truck. I can't wait to see that thing finished. And he's making crazy progress. So I anticipate that it'll be sooner rather than later. So cool, man. Off the cuff here, what are the big differences between Gen 2 and Gen 3 on that Coyote?
Dual fuel. So that I hate that term only because when I hear dual fuel, my first thing is, E85 or gas. That's not what it is.
Exactly.
It's dual fuel injection. So it's got port and direct. But that's the same as the Gen 3. A lot of the Gen 3 Coyote improvements are the same ones you see in the Illuminator. 12-to-1 compression.
Oh, wow.
Just on pump gas. It's got solid improved rotating assembly.
Oh, okay.
So it's, just the solid manly rods there. I mean, they've been using those things since the 0304 Cobras, right?
So the big push for that dual fuel was because the rear were getting washed out, or like on the previous design, they weren't getting enough fuel to the front of that combustion chamber.
Well, the dual fuel, the way that Ford explains it was it allowed them to go more aggressive on the compression ratio and the tuning.
Okay.
There a lot of people are saying that they kept the port injection with the direct injection because of carbon buildup on the intake valves. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I know in theory it makes sense, but there's a lot of people that have torn down direct injected engines and they're fine.
Found nothing.
Yeah. But in theory it makes sense, but that's part of the catch can thing, and whether they work or not, that's a debate. I mean, you could argue this back and forth forever, but the fact is the dual fuel does give you the benefit of letting you run 12-to-1 on the street, and if you start doing aftermarket stuff, you have port fuel injection to add more fuel, so you don't have to deal with a direct injection program.
I got you.
So it's plus 460 horsepower from a factory engine, and then the Illuminator, which will take pretty much anything you want to throw at it out of the box.
Yeah, that's true. That's cool, man. That's gonna be a really cool article. What is that going to be, a series, or is that just a standalone article?
No, that's just that we covered just that engine, so we're done. One and done.
Okay.
It could have been a lot longer. It could have been more than one article, because I mean, Ford Performance, we had a lot of conversations Like there
Very
is
cool.
so much information, between, my recorder and my notes and in my head that I just could not cram into that article. Yeah, they were super great to work with.
Cool, man. Well, go check it out on enginelabs.com, everybody. As for Street Muscle, what do we got going on this week? Oh, we got that article that I was telling you about where Richard Holdner tested all those Torque Storm superchargers.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they tested that one Torque Storm supercharger on a lot of different engines.
Yeah.
And with various results. So go check that one out. Other than that, we're always cranking great stuff out. StreetMuscleMag.com, EngineLabs.com, PowerAutomedia.com, and all the titles under that banner. Check them out. Thank you guys so much for tuning in again. Drop a like and get at us in the comments section. Until next week, 12 noon Pacific time, this has been the RodCAST. Peace out, guys.